Hi, I'm Lee Kelso, host of the Health Call Live Radio Hour, and I'm glad you're here to learn about a new system that provides early warning of Alzheimer's and dementia. So, with me to learn more about that is Dr. Thomas Sawyer, PhD. He's the Chief Operating Officer of a company called Cognitivity Neurosciences. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Lee. Great to be here.
So, what is the big idea? What's the big breakthrough in what your software is able to do?
Yeah, well, what we've been able to do is to address the challenges of detecting cognitive impairment in the early stages of disease. So traditionally, what's happened is that people in the past have had to use long, time-consuming pen and paper tests, which are fraught with biases, things to do with language. You know, when people take a test that's not in their native language, they don't do so well. Huge education bias. People who are more educated do better at tests generally. Culture and language issues. And a learning effect. So we really, starting out in Cambridge University, managed to develop a system which gets round these issues, which have always plagued people looking to pick up on small changes in brain function.
Yeah, so I have seen this process of evaluation. It's typically, as you said, pen and paper. The patient might be asked to draw the face of a clock and some other kind of situations. It takes 20, 25 minutes. How is yours different?
Yeah, well, we use a very different way of assessing the brain's function. And to give you a very crude analogy, a computing analogy, instead of asking memory questions and looking to see how the hard drive works, we actually do look at how the CPU works. So we're very interested in what we call rapid visual processing. So the idea that by exposing the subject to a short duration image, we can ask them to extract a critical piece of information from it and tell us whether or not they've experienced this. So that really looks to see just how quickly the brain processes complicated information. And as such, it's a very objective measure. And indeed, it can be done very quickly.
So this is an iPad-based application, and I understand that pictures are flashing on the screen and I have to react to them. What's special about these images?
Yeah, so these are all natural images, but what we ask the subject to do is to tell us whether or not they saw an animal in the image. Now, that might sound like a strange thing to ask, but actually, the human brain has become it's very well tuned to detecting what we call animacy. And there's a lot of literature in the scientific papers, but the brain is good at detecting these, and it's culturally consistent. So we ask you to look at this short duration image, and then you quickly tap left or right on the screen of the iPad to say whether or not you saw an animal. So very simple. And this is important. You know, it doesn't take much in the way of instructions to get people into doing this. And also it's a language-free task. So that's what's at the heart of it.
And so what you're taking a look at there, going back to your computer analogy, is how fast does my brain process and produce an answer? Is that more important, or is the correct answer yes or no, or is it a combination of both?
Yeah, it's definitely a combination of both. So, I mean, speed of processing has long been associated with early signs of disease, so a decrease in speed of processing. But we're looking to measure the speed and accuracy for each image that is displayed to the subject. Now, that's important because we are able to change the complexity of each of these images. So we will present to the subject a variety of difficulties. Some of them are very easy. It's a large animal in a plain background, or some of them may be more complicated, where it's perhaps a forest scene with a small bird in the corner. By limiting the amount of time the brain has to process this, we can work out where it stops being able to determine these. And the beautiful thing about this approach is that it's very, very objective. So if you are impaired and you cannot see the animal in the image, this remains the same until such time as your cognition improves. So it gives you a very repeatable measure as well.
So what is the outcome telling me then? That there's a warning sign that something is happening? How early in dementia is this detectable?
So what we're really looking for is the early signs of impairment. So that is when people go into a condition it's known as mild cognitive impairment. So this is a kind of your pre-symptomatic disease state. Now, not everybody with mild impairment, or MCI as we call it, will progress into something like dementia, but it's a very good warning signal that something's not quite right. And that's really what the health system needs. I mean, the health system is actually very good at giving a diagnosis when it is presented with the right people. But the challenge is identifying these early stage people, because if someone is detected early, and you're able to diagnose the problem and start to address it, you have massively better outcomes for the patients, and actually huge outcomes, favorable outcomes for payers. It costs a lot less to treat people over their lifetime if you detect early. So the idea that you could have an early warning sign that says, okay, something's not quite right with this patient, let's work out why, and then we can address it very early, is very important in the system, because it just doesn't happen at the moment.
So if I test poorly, if your software detects that something is amiss, I assume then it goes on to the traditional diagnosis process of the pen and paper testing and all those other things?
Yeah, so if your primary healthcare physician is able to detect there's a slight issue, the first thing they can do is apply their contextual expertise. So they can say, okay, well, Tom has come into the clinic, he's not showing cognitive impairment, but he was, clearly alcohol impaired, or he's, having drugs that are associated with cognitive decline, or there's some other issue that we know about. It's when there is no explanation for it, you would then refer to see a specialist. The specialist then can use a whole suite of techniques for working out what's wrong with you through imaging and complicated and expensive techniques, but at least then they are being applied to somebody who needs to see it, and at an early enough stage where, as I say, intervention makes a significant difference.
So I understand your system has been in use in the national health system in the UK for some time now. It just received FDA approval here in the States. What does that mean about how soon it'll be available? How will I access it as a patient? Walk me through all of that.
Yeah, so like you said, we've been used in the NHS in the UK for a little while now, and used at both primary and secondary levels. So the NHS is a really great starting place for us. But this FDA registration and clearance to market really obviously opens up the US market for us. But it's very early days. I mean, we are in the process of commercializing. We want to make this available to help as many people as possible. So we're starting to reach out in the market there, speak to clinicians, and to start having it adopted.
So let's talk a little bit about accuracy. What have you found so far? Just give me that kind of. I'm sure you've got quite a bit of stats and background to tell me more about just how effective it is at spotting early stages of dementia.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've trained the system on subjects collected in a very high quality of clinical study, and what the system is very good at is detecting the difference between unimpaired, mild impairment, and the very early signs of disease. And we have done a number of studies on these, but generally speaking, the system displays a kind of over 90% accuracy at telling the difference between these categories.
Walk me through what happens after a positive indication. I assume then I'm referred forward for additional evaluation. Does your software and your tool play a role there as well?
If we think about the patient pathway, if somebody comes in for a regular health check and shows to have a cognitive issue, which is, the test is conducted as part of a regular health check. So in the same way that you would take a blood pressure test, you can have this, 5-minute quick unsupervised test that at least gives an indication of your brain's health. If that can't be explained by the primary healthcare physician, then you can be referred to see a specialist. The specialist can then use this to assess a patient when they arrive at the specialist clinic at the secondary level. But what's very important about our technology is the fact it can be used repeatedly. So once you've received a diagnosis and a course of treatment, you're able to be monitored on a pretty high resolution basis. I mean, as frequently as the clinician requires, in order to be able to look to see the effect, the positive effects or negative effects of the treatment. If things are going well and you can do this at home, then there's no reason to come back into the clinic. If things are not going so well, then you can be quickly detected and reevaluated. So it's a very powerful tool, but that monitoring thing is a very important piece of the picture. So you can have a consistent measurement from your first identification all the way through the treatment cycle is very important for clinicians.
So our brains slow down with age. So I would assume then, and maybe I'm incorrect, but I'm assuming that your software knows my age and has an expectation for my performance level and adjusts accordingly?
That's exactly right, Lee. So yeah, there is a normal decline in cognitive function associated with aging, which is perfectly healthy. As when you conduct the test, we collect some very basic demographic information, so like sex and age and so on, education level, and then the model can take that into account. So any output you have from the test has taken these into account. You'll be given a score that is relative to your age. Now, there are a number of things that can be done even in the absence of, in the UK, an approved disease-modifying therapeutic. And these are mostly lifestyle issues, which can have a very significant impact on the rate of progression of a disease such as Alzheimer's. So things like, better exercise, eating well, these are things that can be done and do have an impact. But as drugs come to the market, it's going to be more and more important that people are detected early, because the sooner that you start a treatment, the more effective it is. And if we look at the recent approval by the FDA of Adukanyumab from Biogen, the class of patient that should be applied to is definitely these very early stages with a particular pathology, so this amyloid beta pathology. And these patients are not being currently detected in the system very well. So how can you give a treatment to a patient who has never not been identified? So that's the kind of the problem we can solve.
Yeah, I get that. The Adukanyumab does not reverse progression. It does not reverse the disease, but it allegedly will stall progression or stop progression. So I get it. The earlier you can detect, the more effective that becomes. Is there an expectation on when I might be able to use this software at home or in a doctor's office here in the States?
Well, I think on the doctor's office front, sooner rather than later. I mean, we have a considerable amount of interest, and our sales team is really addressing that at the moment. So we're quite excited with the near-term prospects for the US. So indeed, I mean, keep an eye out for it and ask your physician. That's what I would say in that case, because the more interest we have, the faster we can roll.
I'd be very interested in doing a test on myself every 6 months just to see, is that your expectation of how this might eventually be used?
Well, absolutely. I mean, in the same way that you take a blood pressure test as part of your regular interactions with your healthcare provider, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to check how well your brain is functioning. And that's indeed what is the most important organ in your body. I mean, by keeping on top of your brain health, it enables you to address any issues as they come up and just have a better, more functional life for longer.
What else is in your product pipeline at Cognitivity Neurosciences?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So we developed a non-medical version of what we do. So it's more of a kind of a health app. So it has exactly the same technology. The test works in the same way, but it's used on smartphones really in the same way that you would check your heart rate or your weight at home. And what it does do is it enables you to measure yourself against yourself, which is a very empowering thing for people, because if you can't measure something, it's very hard to affect it. So the idea that you on a regular basis on your own smartphone could just look to see how healthy your brain is, and the app can then make you recommendations as how to optimize your lifestyle to give you the best performance from your brain, really opens up a whole new way of thinking about your health and how you address that.
That's a very interesting point. We up till now have not really had a very effective way to gauge what is our cognitive progress or decline. Would be kind of nice to know if all the effort I'm undertaking in exercise and the mind diet and adding more omega-3 fatty acids and all of those lifestyle modifications are actually having a positive impact. That would be a great piece of biofeedback. I'd really enjoy that. Is that available now, or is that still yet to come?
Yeah, no. So I mean, it is available now. Our app is called Optimind, and it's available on the App Store at the moment. And exactly as you say, the idea that you're able to look into are the things you're doing having an impact? What else could you do to have an impact? Because this is the most important asset we have. Like I said, our brain is the most precious organ. So we really should look after it. But what that requires is a reliable and objective way to measure that easily as part of your daily existence, your routine. So that's what we aim to deliver.
Well, fascinating. I'm glad we were able to get together. That is Dr. Thomas Sawyer. He is the Chief Operating Officer of Cognitivity Neurosciences. And interesting to hear more about your product. We'll watch it as it goes forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee.